Welcome everyone to Tips and Tricks Integrating Zoom and Other Virtual Meeting Hosts. And of course, we should add on to this into your Learn on Demand Systems classes. That's where we're integrating them into. So let's dive right in and get started with our basic topics of discussion. We are going to learn about how to work with Zoom and Adobe Connect with our integration capabilities in the TMS. In addition, we're going to talk about the capability of being able to take virtually any virtual meeting host, such as Teams or WebEx or GoToMeeting, and use that using a virtual meeting URL, a virtual meeting host URL. Then we're going to talk about how easy it is to schedule a virtual class and tie all of your elements from surveys and labs and videos and SCORM content, take all of that from the course and tie it together in a class and deliver it in a virtual scenario. And then the second to last topic is going to be the basic tips and tricks of how to get around some of the pitfalls that come up when working with a virtual class. And last but not least, we'll wrap up and do our Q&A. So let's dive into the basics of the virtual class integration. And when we're talking about virtual classroom, we're obviously trying to allow our students to attend classes remotely and virtually inside of a classroom. Now, this is possible today without any sort of extra capability. You could schedule a class in WebEx and hold that class in WebEx. But what we're really looking to do is we're looking to tie all of the classroom components from the class into a single location for all of our students and instructors to be able to deliver effectively. So we are talking about three different capabilities or levels of capability. We're talking about our custom web meeting host URL, which gives us some basic capability where you schedule a meeting or a class inside of that technology and then bring that URL for that class and tie it into your class page, giving you a single place, a single common entry point. The second technology is actually the third listed here, and that is the integrated Zoom virtual meeting host. And that is our newest technology and gives us the capability of being able to put the Zoom meeting host as a virtual meeting host as a technology that we integrate with, so when you change a date or change a time in a class, it will actually update that and deliver it appropriately. And finally, we have our deep integration with the Adobe Connect, a virtual meeting host. And both Adobe Connect and Zoom offer recording capabilities and the ability to be able to access the class and be able to change out instructors and things like that. So let's take a look at the first solution that we have. This is the basic solution. This is the capability to allow you as the consumer of our training management system or TMS to be able to take a virtual meeting. In this case, on the picture side, you see a URL for a Teams, a Microsoft Teams meeting. Take that Teams meeting and paste it as, copy it and paste it as a virtual classroom URL. And you put that in, and then whenever somebody goes to their class page, they'll be able to click on Enter Classroom and be able to access this virtual meeting. Now, there are a couple of benefits of doing this, and it shouldn't be looked at just because it's sort of our least level of integration. It shouldn't be looked at as the least powerful because you can do lots of things with this. For example, the meeting is going to be available whenever you have the meeting set up for. The Enter Classroom button will appear on the page. While you do not have the ability to have recordings inside of the class enrollment pages, it will give you the ability to record the meeting and distribute it through a different mechanism, for example, email. So there's lots of capability here. You're going to hear me say this over and over. Always remember that you should set this up using your normal scheduling process, whether that be through Outlook calendars or through the application itself. Whatever you normally would use to schedule a meeting, you can schedule that meeting. And then once you have that URL, make sure you paste that in your class. And we'll show you how to do that in the demonstration. But always, always, always keep time zones in mind when you're considering what you're going to be doing for a class. Using virtual classrooms is opening up a whole new world, literally our entire world. You don't just have to deliver to who can come physically to your classroom. You can deliver to people across the country or across the globe. So if you think about it, if you have an 8 a.m. start time on the East Coast, somebody who is attending your class from the West Coast will be starting at 5 a.m. That's a little early for them. But if you start later on the East Coast, you're going to have to run later on the East Coast. So that's why I'm saying always keep time zones in mind, is because we're only talking about within the United States. If you go outside of the United States into Europe or APAC countries, those places are going to have much different times than what you're used to scheduling. So I'm located in the central time zone. When I schedule things, I normally schedule them for say 8 to 5 in the central time zone. That is potentially alienating both the people who might be attending an 8-hour class in Europe as well as in APAC countries. So there is a significant amount of investment in your head when you're scheduling these meetings to keep time zones in mind. And I will be repeating that throughout the session today. All right. So now we're going a little bit deeper into the integration, a little bit more capability, and a little bit of configuration that's needed. We do have some configuration that's needed for a Zoom, using Zoom as a virtual meeting host. You bring your licenses and your licensed accounts to us, and we work with you we as Learn on Demand Systems will work with you in order to put your integration in place. Once that integration is in place, it's as simple as a drop down, and that's it. You just say, I want to do a virtual meeting. And when you do a virtual meeting, you select Zoom or whatever the name of your particular integration is called. It might be called Company XYZ Zoom or Zoom Company XYZ. But you drop that down, you put it in, and you're ready to go. The class is all set. There are a couple of caveats to that. Remember that when you change the times on your class in a Zoom meeting, this will automatically change not just your class, but also your classroom. So if you set it up for 8 a.m. and you want to change it to 10 a.m., you change the time and the meeting gets updated automatically. Any of your cloud-based or cloud-saved recordings are available after they have been rendered inside of the TMS. And I'll show you where you can access those after the class. This is true of both Zoom and our Adobe Connect integration. This does not include the virtual meeting host custom URL. Now, there's one very important and very serious consideration we need, and that is that the instructor email address that's being used in the TMS for the instructor of a particular class needs to match a licensed user in the Zoom account. If your Zoom implementation does not have that user's email address and match it, it will give you a warning when you attempt to create the class, and it won't actually save the class. All right. So you have to make sure that that exists. You may want to make sure that you're logged into Zoom and make sure that the instructor exists, or Once you've confirmed that the instructor exists, you can reuse that instructor account from that point forward. All right. And one thing I should mention is the configuration is very simple. It's 3 boxes of information. You send us, we request that information from you. You obtain that information, you send it to us, and we put it in place. But once again, your Zoom account, our implementation through the TMS. Last but not least is our more legacy or mature or deeper integration with the TMS, and that is the Adobe Connect integration. We've been working with Adobe Connect for years. It is reputable. It is a commonly used tool. It's one of the better formatted tools for doing classes, and you can bring your own Adobe Connect license once again to the table here, obtained from Adobe Connect or any of the third-party companies that handle the licensing. Not only can you, that's the way you do it. You bring your Adobe Connect licensing, a little bit more information that needs to exchange, but once again, we'll tell you what information to get and work with you to get the implementation set up. And then after that, once again, it is a simple drop down. It is not a big configuration when you're scheduling your class. You do the data exchange with us. We set up the integration based on what you see there in the middle of the screen. And then you just simply select that implementation whenever you're setting up a class, as I'll show you during our demonstration. You can change any of the class information at any time, and the Adobe Connect implementation will automatically update your Adobe Connect session so that the right person is in there, the right time is in there, the right date's in there, and everything works. So once those integrations are selected, and it should be noted right here that you don't have to do one or the other. You could have all of these options available to you depending on what your licensing looks like. So if you want to use WebEx and Teams and GoToMeeting, you can have each one of those um, as an alternative. It's simply a matter of copying and pasting the URL for the meeting for a particular class and putting it in place, as I'll demonstrate shortly. You could have both a Zoom and an Adobe Connect license and choose from those. You could also have multiple Adobe Connect licenses or multiple Zoom licenses and be able to work with those as well. All right. Each one of them can be a separate implementation selectable from the dropdown. Here's Brian's easy guide to making a completely virtual class, right? There's no physical attendance here, but it doesn't mean that there couldn't be, or potentially a hybrid where you have some people in a classroom and some people working remotely. In the TMS, in our training management system, you create a class. When you create that class, you select an existing course from the list of courses available to your company. A course is nothing more than a selection of activities. It might be a set of SCORM content, maybe an evaluation or a survey, maybe an assessment, and then maybe some labs, and then a survey at the end. That one thing is put together into a course. That would be the selection of activities. That's already pre-generated for you. The courses are available. Then you select your class schedule, what time and dates it's going to happen. You'll see this come up again. It is very important to make sure that if you are teaching over multiple days, that you select multiple days, as I'll show you in my examples later on, instead of one long session that covers multiple days. And I'll show you what that means and what that looks like. Then you select from your virtual classroom options, a virtual classroom host URL. And again, each class can have its own different host URL. As a matter of fact, it probably should, unless you're reusing a same meeting for, say, multiple classes. Your Zoom integration is a drop down and select, and then your Adobe Connect integration is a drop down and select. And then you select your instructor or instructors, making sure, again, if you're working with Zoom, that your instructor's email addresses match the Zoom account. And then you save or click on OK, and then you teach. That's really all it is. Now, we will talk about some of the things that instructors and students may face when they're working with these tools in just a minute when we do our demonstration. But I do want to let you know it's really that easy. And creating a class from scratch is a very easy process inside the TMS, but you do have to keep your schedule in mind. You do want to remember, for example, if you're creating a virtual classroom URL, you are going to want to use an already existing meeting. You need to create the meeting either before or while you're creating your class, so that you make sure that your times match, your dates match, and that your meeting URL is generated. Sometimes it won't get generated until you actually send it out. With the Zoom integration or Adobe integration, you don't have to worry as much, but you do want to make sure that you have your instructor included, or your um, instructors, if that's the case. So let's take a look at doing what it takes to actually get these integrations working. I'm going to stop my slideshow. And here is your typical meeting invite for Microsoft Teams, right? So here is the title. Here's who is coming from. I include myself just so that I have it. But all I'm really looking for here is this Teams meeting. Now, it's going to be a good idea to send this invite to your instructor as well, so that they have the meeting invite in case anything, somebody couldn't connect to the TMS or something like that, although that doesn't often happen. But all you need is this little hyperlink here. So if you copy that hyperlink, and you can see I moused over it and you can see what it looks like. So I've copied that already. Now let me bring up my virtual classroom. And inside of my virtual classroom, you'll see here, I've got a name, I've got a time zone and who it's for. My session times are set. Now, this is what I was referring to before about multiple days. You don't want to have it go from 421 until 423. You want to have each one of these be a day, right? Very important, very good um, it's a very good practice to make sure that you do this. And it's going to be the exact same schedule as what we have setting our reoccurrence in Teams for the team meeting, right? We're going to match this. Notice that because this class in the basic is in the Mountain Time Zone, that is the time zone we're going to want to base our meeting time on as well. All right. So you set up your meetings, you set up your delivery. Now, in this case, we're using a virtual delivery. Like I said, we have physical and virtual or hybrid, and then the virtual. And under virtual, we have the custom virtual classroom choice. You'll see there's lots of other choices that we have here, but custom virtual. And then our Teams meeting has already been pasted in. Okay. So if I go back and refresh my page here, you will see that I have my enter classroom button. I also have my lab activities and everything else that I would normally have for this class. And so when I click on enter classroom here, you'll see that I get my interstitial page. You will see this kind of thing come up all the time. As an instructor, it is important to practice good screen hygiene and make sure that you get rid of any excess windows that you don't need. The rest of these windows I need for presentation, so I'm going to keep those open. But here is my team, and I'm sitting here and ready to go in my classroom, and it's just sitting there ready for me to teach. And the students will have an enter classroom button. They'll click on enter classroom and they'll be able to join me in my conversation. It's that easy. All right. It doesn't take much. Now, even though you can't get recordings to be a part of, you'll notice up at the top here, um, there's no link to recordings in my class. Um, that is that is because this is a virtual classroom URL, classroom host URL. We don't capture the recordings, but that doesn't mean that you can't record your session, whether it's Teams or WebEx or whatever. Capture it locally and distribute it using emails and attachments and things like that, or other formats. This is not meant to say that you can't record. It just means that the recordings don't automatically show with that, because it's not that type of integration. All right, so let's move into the Zoom integration. And remember, this is our brand new, just came out Zoom integration. And when working with Zoom, um, you'll notice that I have an enter classroom button here. A little bit earlier when I was prepping, I did not have an enter classroom button. It actually has something that said launch classroom, and it said your classroom will be available at a certain time. That is because we make sure that you are not going into the meeting or starting the meeting when it's not scheduled. That's part of the reason you use the schedule in the class. Now, once again, if we go in and take a look at our building here, you'll see that we've got a course set up. We've got our class. Once again, we have our um, time here, although this one is set for Central America time as opposed to um, Central time. But we have our time set. We also have our delivery type to virtual, and the drop down is Zoom, and there it is. All right. Now, I am going to be using my lovely assistant, Jane. She is going to be playing the part of a student. It is very difficult to get Zoom to do on one computer two different connections. Like I'll show you for Adobe Connect, I can do it with very little difficulty. But inside of Zoom, it's a little bit harder. Now, once again, when I click on Enter Classroom, I'm playing the role of the instructor here. I'm going to get this interstitial page, which wants me to open things, and then this page stays up. There's another page that comes up that's going to come up on another monitor. Um, but then um, once this Zoom interface comes up, I want to get rid of that interstitial page. Again, we're practicing good screen hygiene here because you're going to be displaying a lot. So one of the things you'll notice is that when I go into Zoom as the instructor, it takes me right in. However, my student is sitting out in a waiting room saying, your instructor will admit you, or, please wait. And you, as an instructor, I see that there's somebody waiting, and I can actually even look at the waiting room, and you can see the waiting room and then the meeting room. So I can say, I will admit Jane, and then Jane will take it. Takes maybe a minute or so for the sync to happen, and there it is. Now I can go through and do everything like I would. I can do my recording. Remember, when you do a record, there's the record on this computer or record to the cloud. As an instructor, it's very important to remember to record to the cloud. And I can see my chat here, and you can see Jane has typed something. So I'll say, hello, Jane. And everything is good to go. I'm working, I'm doing my lab, everything's good to go. Now, it's the end of the day. I have stopped my recording, and I then end my meeting. And I click on end meeting, and I have two choices. I can either leave the meeting or I can end the meeting from all. If I leave the meeting, it will tell me I have to make somebody else a host in order for me to leave the meeting. So I don't typically want to do that. What I want to do is end the meeting. And then when I do that, like I said, there's another page that pops up. And if you're delivering from a single monitor, your monitor will very quickly fill up with pop-ups. So it's always a good idea to get rid of those excess pop-ups. But the student will also get a notice that says that the host has ended the meeting. Okay. All right, now we're moving into um, our flagship, our deepest integration with a virtual meeting host, and that is Adobe Connect. Now, when I'm working with Adobe Connect, I once again go into my page, and when I'm working on my page, I've got my courses, I've got my time zone set, I've got my session times, and once again, this one happens to be set in Mountain Time. Take time zones into account when you're thinking about this. My delivery is virtual, and you'll see that I've got my virtual meeting host set up. And in addition to that, this looks very similar to the Zoom integration. One of the other differences that you get with Adobe Connect is you have the ability to choose a template if you have designed a template in the inside of Adobe Connect. A template is just a way of displaying your screen. So if you've got a bunch of add-ins and things like that that you typically use, and have like a logo and things like that that appear, you can save that as a template and then issue this template to every single user that goes in. All right, so now as far as Adobe Connect goes, you'll notice that I don't have a enter classroom button. And the reason I don't have that is because we need to check and see whether or not the software is installed. And this is part of uh, A, the fact that it's Adobe Connect, and B, it's because of this deep integration, we actually check to make sure your software is there, that it's turned on, that the web browser is allowing it, the ports are available. So we actually have a little test virtual classroom. And when I click on this, it goes out and it says, are you sure you want to allow this? I say yes. You'll see here in a second that it switches over, and then I'm good to go. Now, if I did need to download and install software, it would tell me that. Okay. Now I have my enter classroom button, and I'm going to enter the classroom. And once I enter the classroom, I'm going to minimize this screen, and I'm also going to be entering as a student at the same time. All right. So here is my Adobe Connect for instructor. Yep, there we go. And notice once again, I've got this page in my way, so I'm going to get rid of it. And then I'm also going to be doing it as a student. And you can see here, I've got my students enrollment page, and I click on enter classroom as well, doing it in a different browser. These are browser agnostic in most cases. We don't know of any restrictions or anything like that, but I'm going to move that out of the way. And then last but not least, I am going to bring this over. So now I've got both my student interface, which is down in the lower right, and my instructor interface, which is in the upper left. And I have the capability of doing my recording. I can chat. I can change the way that my screen looks. And notice as I change my screen, the student screen changes as well. All right. And this is what we were referring to by templates. You can select the different templates as options. And then when you're all done, you go to your meeting once again and end meeting. And when you do this, you can give a message, hey, this is your instructor, class is done for today. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And then you click on OK, and notice everybody gets the message. All right, the host has ended this and it's done. Now, this does not mean that people can't come back in later if they choose to and start the meeting back up again by clicking on enter classroom. But once again, the instructor is in charge. The instructor is the host. The instructor is the one that's responsible for making sharing happen and the changing of the screen layouts and all that kind of stuff. So that is the deeper integration capability of Adobe Connect. So one last thing I want to show you before we move out is I want to show you the recordings. You can see here that there is a recordings link at the top of the page. It's right here below the word connect. But I want to show you what that looks like. And so inside of the Adobe Connect, you'll notice that once again, even to view the Adobe Connect and go into the recordings, um, you click on watch, and it loads Adobe Connect one more time. Now that's one thing that is sort of a thing to know. You may have to install additional software in order to be able to read. So here we are at the beginning. You'll see that we even have various save points and switches. You know, when I switch between the different tools, this is a good way for an instructor to be able to save information and be able to display information, and also put in these little checkpoints so that people know when they did certain things. All right. And this has audio, it has sharing, it has all of the information that a student sees in a normal Adobe Connect session. And again, this is all recorded up in the cloud for you and managed in your Adobe Connect session, but it's also available for viewing inside of your your class page, or as we call it, the enrollment page. All right, so that is pretty much it for the demonstrations. Let's go back to our slides here and talk about a couple of other things. Here's where I try to impart some information for both the scheduler and the instructors. And you see a lot of tips in here, and they're important tips, but this is sort of where the voice of experience is sort of coming to play. Always, always, always take time zones into account, whether you're an instructor or a scheduler or a student. You have to think about, when is this in my time zone? Now, some programs will automatically translate time zones for the end users, like if you're using Teams and you're sending somebody the meeting invite. But when it's coming up to, a session in Zoom where the student can't get into the class uh, sooner than 15 minutes before or 60 minutes before, whatever the default setting is for your Zoom account, then they aren't going to get a enter classroom button until that time. And if their time zone is completely different than your time zone, they may be thinking that their class isn't happening, or that they've already missed class or something like that. So always take time zones into account. Enroll yourself in classes to be able to check for recordings in Zoom. You can't look at Zoom recordings unless you're the instructor or one of the students. So you want to make sure that you do that. Of course, you can go view it inside of the Zoom recordings. You just can't do it inside of the TMS. Remember to license the instructor account for Zoom. Make sure that the email address matches what you have in the TMS. Ensure you have reoccurrence set up for each day. So if your class is going to run Monday through Friday, don't set up a Teams meeting or a GoToWebinar or whatever that runs Monday from 8 a.m. until Friday at 5 p.m. Make one that happens on Monday from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., Tuesday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Make them separate occurrences. And again, if you're doing your scheduling inside of, say, Outlook or something like that, reoccurrence is very easy to set up. But make sure you're scheduling them for intermittent days for the times that your class is going to happen. Use multiple days in the TMS, not one long session over multiple days. And what I was getting at is that it is possible to make a single session that lasts an entire week inside of the Learn on Demand TMS. If you do that, you will cover your bases, but it is a much it is not the best practice, nor is it going to be as successful, because it won't have an end time. It won't know when to stop things, right? During each day. So schedule it for multiple days. Now, as far as an instructor goes, most important is arrive as early as possible to your virtual classroom. Remember, your students may be coming in and getting lost, and they may not be aware that they're in the right place. It's sitting here at a blank white screen, and all it says is Adobe Connect, or all it says is Zoom meeting. What am I going to be let in? Is it going to run? This is all completely up to you to make sure that it happens. You can enter a virtual meeting host URL at any time. So if you want to test things out, you can do that. Remember that you are, as a virtual delivery, are going to be sharing at least one screen and perhaps multiple screens. Always be mindful of what you're sharing. If you're having a conversation with a student, you do not want that being sent out to all of your other students. So make sure you're practicing that screen hygiene that I mentioned. Multiple monitors means smoother delivery. I have 3 monitors that I use for a typical delivery. If possible, I would actually prefer more. So more screens, more better. But you can do this without. I've delivered many training sessions with just one monitor, but consider external monitors, consider a USB monitor or something like that, or if absolutely necessary, consider multiple machines. But we'll talk about that in more detail in a different webinar. Remember to start your recordings And also remember to end your recordings before you end your class. It is important to remember to end. Sometimes if you don't end your meeting, you just close out the window, that meeting will keep running and keep recording completely dead air for up to 24 hours. So don't do that. Make sure you end your recording and end your meeting or class at the end of the day. Manage your virtual classroom like a physical classroom. There's no difference in teaching styles. You still have to handle your students effectively. You also have to know your topics. You have to do everything that you'd have to do if you were delivering normally. And always keep in mind that your students may have to install additional software to use virtual meeting hosts, whether it be Teams or GoToMeeting or Adobe Connect. There are things that they may have to download. They shouldn't be afraid of doing it, and you should know about it and make sure that you help calm their nerves when it comes to that. All right. All right, so a couple of extra resources. First of all, this is one of a series of webinars, and there are a whole slew of them out there. You can catch all of those at www.learnondemandsystems.com/webinars. Or if you're looking for information specifically about the virtual meeting hosts and the comparisons, like the chart that you saw, in addition to some explanation of that chart, you can check that out at https:// LODS.1/VM hosts.